Now, we all know EVGA as one of the kind of market leaders when it comes to NVIDIA-based graphics cards, and they've always stuck with NVIDIA and not really gone into the realm of dabbling with AMD graphics cards. And the same could be said with their motherboards. They've always stuck with Intel. We've seen some pretty decent boards out there, Z390, Z490, Z590, but now they've gone with AMD. Let's do this.
What's the matter, son?
It's this PC, Dad. I just wish it ran a little bit cooler.
Stop whining and toughen up with the tough liquid 360ml ARGB sync all-in-one liquid cooler from Thermaltake.
Is that the one with the three 120ml tough fans, an RGB CPU lock, and a rotational cap so that the logo faces the right way, no matter what?
Oh, yes. It also has a high-performance water block with copper plate to keep your CPU super chill.
That looks amazing. I'm going to order it right now. I'll be back.
Hey, that's my line. Find out more by clicking the link in the description below.
So this is the first motherboard from EVGA that sports an AMD chipset, and this is quite a big one really, because I guess what they've essentially tried to do is read the market and sort of see where things are going. And yes, lately we've had a kind of lot of information and a lot of stuff coming out about Z690, the performance of Intel 12th Gen, Alder Lake processors, and obviously EVGA, are there as well in terms of having products for that. But this is a very, very interesting one because it's X570. So they haven't decided to go with X570S like the new boards that we have seen, but I'm still interested nonetheless because EVGA, as I mentioned at the start of this, have always kind of tried to take it one step further, looking at overclocking and pushing the boundaries and the limits of your hardware, as far as they physically can go. So I wanted to do kind of a quick unboxing, and then I wanted to show you something that is essentially a little trick up EVGA sleeve, which I think is going to be very interesting for people who are into overclocking, or people who maybe don't quite know what to do when it comes to overclocking and they maybe want to have a little dabble. So we get our installation quick guide in here. So for anyone who's not really had an EVGA board before, I always find them quick install guides as a bit of a bit lackluster in the grand scheme of things. We do get an accessory box, so let's put this off to one side and see exactly what we get there. So inside, I'm expecting the usual kind of stuff, but we get what looks like some M.2 screws, so always handy to have. We end up with some standoffs. Now, these are really interesting. I'm going to put these to one side because there is something, for anyone who's never had an EVGA board before, there is something that this comes with which is really, really cool. Now, we also get some screws. I'm not even sure what they're for, potentially going with the standoff, so we'll put them to one side. We do get a little USB flash drive as well. So EVGA have actually listened to people. People don't use driver CDs or driver DVDs anymore, so this is really, really nice to see. We get a Probit cable, so this is for anyone who wants to hook up a multimeter, wants to be able to read their voltage readouts, and this kind of further instills that EVGA are all about kind of the enthusiast, the hardcore overclocker, and kind of what they're trying to do. We get some M.2 thermal pads in there as well, so it's a bit weird that they're not kind of pre-installed. Maybe we'll see kind of why that is. We also get our Wi-Fi antennas because, as naturally we'd expect with the X570 chipset, you do get Wi-Fi and everything as well. We get two SATA cables and another two SATA cables. I don't think they're braided, but does look like... Okay, none of them are right angle either, which is a bit weird to see. Normally you'd expect to see maybe two right angled ones and two normal ones. We also get a case badge sticker, quite nice if you want to put that on your case, your wall, wherever you want to put it. I don't know what people do with these things these days. So let's put that to one side and see what else we get. So the motherboard itself, I'm going to put that to one side, and straight away, you can probably get the general gist that it's big in terms of width. It's a wide board. But the thing that I'm actually really kind of interested to see, and I've seen these before, and they're always, a bit of a party piece, and maybe I'm going to put it in the background so you guys can see it in future videos. But let's create some space here and show you what this is. So this is actually a PCB of this exact motherboard. So this is basically what you get. So it gives you a general idea as to how big it is, but it gives you an idea as to what the layout is, especially if you are an enthusiast and you want to maybe mod the board, maybe you want to do something a little bit different with it. So on here it does give us kind of a general idea as to what the phases are like, how many phases we actually have. So it's got 14 phases here, 2 up here. I believe it's 14 plus 2 plus 1. So I believe there's actually 17 phases in total. It does say 16 phase here, but I'm pretty sure there is another phase on there. The main thing that you're going to notice just from this is the general layout of the actual board. Instead of having our CPU socket and our memory down here, it's actually all been turned a little bit, and we'll sort of show that off on the actual motherboard itself. But the interesting thing about this, that I just think is one of the coolest things ever, is when you're someone like us, a member of the tech media and things like that, we end up using basically test benches. So this essentially can be used as a bit of a test bench. So with these screws here and these standoffs, what you can actually do is grab the screws, you can put it into the bottom here. I believe this is how to do it at least. And we can screw this down, and obviously with a screwdriver, you'd end up doing this. And it basically allows you to kind of use it as a bit of a test bench. So we can put a few more in down here, and then your motherboard will just sit on top of this. And it's just a nice kind of makeshift test bench. We use the Streacom open bench table in conjunction with, is it Overclocking TV, or I can't even remember. But yeah, we use that. This is just basically the same sort of thing. Yes, there's not going to be any room to kind of screw your power supply down and, have custom loop fancy cooling and stuff like that. It's just going to kind of have to sit there. But it's a novel little idea. So novel little ideas to one side. Let's get into kind of the main reason why you're here, which is all down to the motherboard itself. So open this up and taking the motherboard out, this gives us our first glimpse at kind of what it's all about. And straight away you can see it is not for the faint-hearted. So let's take off all the protective stuff so you guys can get a better idea without kind of loads of glare and stuff on it. Okay, there's none there, but we have some on the audio. I always hate trying to get these like plastic films off because they never really come off in one piece. You kind of have to fight with them a little bit, as I'm proving to myself right now, because that bit's come off but the other bit hasn't come off. Come on, come on. And with a little bit of gentle persuasion and a little bit of patience, you'll still find that you have loads of plastic stuff left on there, but it's enough for now. So let's talk about the layout of the board. I mean, straight away you can see it is not an ATX motherboard, it is eATX. The weird thing is, because it is so wide and the layout of it, it does look like it's actually kind of wider than it is taller, but we can confirm we have a standoff here, here and here, here, here and here, here, here and here. So it actually does still use the kind of ATX form factor. It's just got this little extended bit here, and for a very, very good reason. And most of that comes down to the power delivery on the board. So straight away, I mentioned on the PCB, the layout of the CPU socket has been rotated ever so slightly. So normally you'd have your brackets top and bottom, now it's side to side, and the memory slots are up here. There is only 2 memory slots. The reason behind that is overclocking 2 DIMMs is a lot easier than overclocking 4 DIMMs. It's as simple as that. Whenever you look at pro overclockers, generally they'll be using either 1 or 2 DIMMs. This kind of just goes off that. But by doing that, it's allowed them to kind of free up quite a lot of the board down this one side. So we have all of our main power connectors. So we have a 24 pin, which is nothing out of the ordinary. This is kind of where we'd expect it anyway. But we do have an 8 pin here and an 8 pin here. There are no 8 pins at the top of the board. They are all down this one side. I'm going to admit, if you're using this on a test bench, that's fine. It doesn't really matter where it is. Using this inside a case, that is an absolute godsend. Purely because from a cable management standpoint, everything is kind of over here. Other cool things that I really like about this board, and this is the first time I've actually taken it out of the box, but I'm seeing things straight away that I just think are amazing. BIOS updates. So we all know updating your BIOS can be a tricky thing. We have a dedicated video, which is one of our most popular videos, on how to update BIOS, how to reset CMOS. These are the problems that people have. And generally speaking, you will have on the rear I/O a USB dedicated for flash BIOS, and then you'll have like a little button somewhere. This does not have it. It has a reset CMOS button. I will talk about the rest of the rear I/O in a little bit, but instead we have a little USB, a standard USB like you'd have as an external header, not an internal header, up here, dedicated for the flash BIOS. Then we have a little clear CMOS button just up here as well. We also have buttons, power, reset, 2 debug LEDs. I'm not even sure why we need 2. I'm sure someone's going to sound off in the comments and tell us why we need 2, but there are 2. Why not? We can see as well on this board, they haven't tried to cover everything up. Now, I'm a big advocate of the Gigabyte Extreme boards, the ASUS Extreme boards, where it just looks like one giant heatsink. I think it looks really, really nice, but there is something also to be said about this. The fact that I can see just sheer components, and I know I'm stroking it, I know it's a little bit weird, but there are sheer just amounts of chokes and capacitors and transistors and ICs. It's just absolutely amazing. It's a real kind of sight to actually look at and to appreciate kind of how much thought on the technical side has actually gone into this. Now, another area that I actually do want to talk about on this board is the cooling side of things, because generally speaking, we'd expect kind of a large heatsink cooler up here, going down here into a smaller one here. On this board, because obviously the CPU socket and everything has been slightly rotated, there's nothing at the top. Instead, we have this stupidly, and I mean stupidly large, heatsink going all the way down the side into this one here, then into a heat pipe which comes down to here, and I'm guessing being X570, can't quite see it, but being X570 and not X570S, I'm guessing there is some kind of a cooling solution under here normally. Although I'm looking at it, it doesn't look like there could be. I'm kind of intrigued now, and am actually looking at this thinking, if I take this off, can I get a better look as to kind of what's under here? But I'm going to take a stab in the dark here. Hopefully you saw what I did there, stab in the dark, because this is the X570 Dark. I was trying to be funny. But either way, I'm going to say there is no active cooling solution under here. I can't see a cable coming from it. It doesn't look like it's going to be big enough. I think this is just a passive design. So essentially you could claim this is an X570S motherboard, which is still X570. It's just brands like Gigabyte, MSI and ASUS have kind of taken on this moniker of S, meaning silent. EVGA just turned around and said, well, why do we need to have that? It's still X570. This is our design. We don't need to give it any kind of fancy naming structure. So they've done that. Other real kind of noticeable things on here is we've got all of our LEDs up here as well for kind of readout, troubleshooting, as well as them debug LEDs. We also have a little connector up here for our Pro bit, which is going to be able to basically allow you to monitor voltages of various different parts of the board. So VCore, CPU, SoC, VDIM, your 12 volt, your ground, all that kind of good stuff, which again, whether you're a hardcore overclocker or someone who's maybe just even, trying to dabble into things, it's going to be one of them things that really could save you a lot of time when you're troubleshooting. In terms of fan connectors, I'm just going to go around the board and sort of have a little look. So we have 2 up here, which are CPU fan 1 and CPU fan 2. So they have tried to kind of keep it out of the way a little bit instead of up here, because obviously we have new stuff up here now. So they have got it over here. We've also got 2 fan headers down here. One is for a pump and one is a power fan, they brand it as, so system fan. We've got 2 also down in this corner here. We have a channel fan just down there. And that looks to be it. So we've got 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Looks like it's 7 fan headers in total, which, is a decent amount. Especially if you are going to be doing overclocking, you're probably not actually going to be using that many kind of fans in total. If this is going in a case, 7 fans is more than enough. If you have more than 7 fans, you're probably going to have a fairly big case, which is going to have some kind of a PWM fan controller in there. So you're going to kind of have everything that you need for that anyway. Now, there is another power connector on the board that I've only just noticed as well, which is a nice little 6-pin, which is situated just down here. I'm guessing this is going to be supplementary power for the PCI Express, just to kind of give you a little bit more oomph to give you the full bandwidth that you need across the 2 X16 slots, which are both physically X16 with pins going all the way up to the end, as well as our X4 slot. And then obviously we have M.2s under here, which I'm guessing is going to be based just on the look of it. 2, maybe 3, but I'm gonna hazard a guess at 2. Maybe I'll unscrew this and confirm on Twitter at some point, you know, kind of what's going on. Would actually be nice to kind of rip this all off and see exactly how it looks. I mean, admittedly, it's going to look very, very similar to the kind of, you know, PCB one, but just with a few raised things on there. Other than that, what else have we got going on? We have USBs down here, which are kind of parallel with the board, which makes cable management a little bit easier. All of our front panel connectors and everything down here. We have, in terms of RGB, addressable, normal, and that's it. So again, they're all kind of situated in the same place. Personally, would have liked to have maybe seen it split, so an addressable and a normal one at the top, and then the same down the bottom instead of all of them at the bottom, purely because of cable reach and things like that. But again, if you're having problems with cable reach, you're probably using a big case and you'd like to think that you maybe have some kind of a hub to kind of deal with that anyway, you know. So there is that. Other than that, we have got some switches on here as well. So we have got PCI Express, what just look like little dip switches. So there are 5 in total, which straight away tells me this has got 2 M.2 slots, because we got the first switch for the first slot, second is for the M.2, third for the M.2, fourth for this X16 slot, and then fifth for the X4 slot. So we have got these little dip switches that we can essentially turn things off. So again, if you're troubleshooting, trying to overclock, do you really need this enabled? Do you need this enabled? And potentially that could mean that you're getting cleaner and more power directly to the places where you want it to be, instead of powering slots and devices that maybe you're not actually using at that particular moment in time. For storage, along with the 2 M.2s, we have also got 4 banks of 2, so we have got 8 SATA ports in total. We have got USB 3.2, a single port over here. I'm guessing this is going to be 3.2 Gen 2, being X570. And we've also got our Type-C internal connector just here as well. Other than that, we have got 2 little switches, which are, I'm just having a little look, I'm guessing, so one of them's got 3 modes, so I don't know whether that's going to be different BIOSes. Sometimes with boards, obviously, you will get a little switch to kind of enable and disable little different BIOSes, especially if you end up bricking one, corrupting one, that kind of thing. Especially with the placement of that one, I'm going to guess that that is potentially for the BIOS. And then we have another one which has just got 2 switches, which is for SW slow, so some kind of slow mode that we have seen on the likes of ASUS boards and things in the past as well. And I mean, that's the bulk of the board. On the back, obviously, we get this really cool branding, which I've got to admit looks bloody cool, because not only does it say Dark, but it's also kind of got the Ryzen ring on there as well. So really sort of, I guess, shouting home the fact that this is EVGA's dartboard, but the fact of the matter is it's an AMD EVGA dartboard. So I did say I mentioned about the rear I/O. So on the rear I/O, we have got a PS2 mouse keyboard combo port. Again, overclockers love this, and that's why you'll find this kind of connector, even though it's got some nostalgic value to it, that is why you'll find it on the likes of kind of boards that are geared more towards extreme overclocking. We have got 2 USB ports here, reset CMOS, Wi-Fi as well, 2 2.5G Ethernet ports. We've got our super speed USB, there's 4 of them in total, so 10 gigabit per second. We've got a Type-C, which again is 10 gigabit per second, SPDIF, as well as our standard audio. And you can see down here, this is kind of our audio area, kind of what's going on there to a certain degree. We've got a few resistors and everything down there, which are rated for 100 farads as well. So yeah, I mean, design-wise, I think it's great. Spec-wise, just from what I've seen, I haven't even looked into the full specs on this, but it seems like you're going to have enough bandwidth to kind of put anything on it, and it's going to take it, anything that you throw at it. Now, the thing that I do want to do with this is I want to get it booted up, and that's why I've actually got my trusty Ryzen 9 5950X, and I want to get this connected up, put it on the board, and boot into the BIOS, because from what I've seen, this BIOS, it helps you. And I can't get it any simpler than that. I'm a firm believer that overclocking, for the most part, is a dying art. On something like this, I'll give it to you. It has the capabilities and the kind of possibilities of being able to push it further, especially if you're using either custom loop or potentially even going down the route of liquid nitrogen, dry ice, and extreme overclocking through that means. What I want to do is just get a basic 5950X in here with some kind of a CPU cooler, boot it up into the BIOS, because there is a mode that will actually overclock it for you and then stress test it for you and basically give you a general idea as to where you should be aiming for, what you should be shooting for. So let's get this all out of the way, get the screen up here, get this booted up and see exactly what it can do. So we've got essentially our test bench built up, and this is kind of what it looks like on that kind of makeshift test bench. So let's turn it on and see what the BIOS is all about. Now the first thing you're going to notice is that it's loud. The reason it's loud is just on kind of further inspection is in the rear I/O there is actually 2 fans in there. That's a nice sound as well. The fact that it has an onboard speaker, for some reason you don't tend to get that on motherboards anymore. And again, when it comes to troubleshooting, that is one of the most just pivotal kind of features to have. So ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, if you're listening to this, start putting speakers back on now. I know like with MSI and their Godlike and ASUS with their Extreme, they've got these nice little screen readouts, which, you know, are fancy. It's a nice little thing to have. But I'd honestly love to see the inclusion of a little speaker like this one. So when we first boot up, we get the usual new CPU installed. You can set FTPM, blah, 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 blah. We don't need to worry about that because we're not even going to boot into Windows. So now that we're into the BIOS, there are a couple of things really that I want to show you, and it all comes down to overclocking. So over here we do have set a conservative overclock, gamer mode. And this means it will, based on the CPU, kind of find what it thinks is the right conservative overclock. So do you want to save CPU 4300 megahertz profile and reset? I'm guessing this is going to change between each CPU, so whether you're using a 5950X, 5900X, you'd like to think that EVGA have tested this with multiple different CPUs and therefore, you know, kind of know what's going on. The important one here though is this, Evga Oc Robot. What this is actually going to do is take our Ryzen 9 5950X with a default frequency of 3400 megahertz, and it's just going to start pumping the clock speed up. So 4 gigahertz now up to 4.1, and that's inclusive of the CPU voltage, which obviously then relays to our CPU temperature. Now we're using a Noctua D15S on here, so our temperatures are always going to be quite nice, should we say. And as you can see now, it's going, you know, beyond that 4.2 gigahertz, and it's just going to kind of keep going. At the moment we're at 44%, so it's just going to kind of keep going through here, and it's going to find essentially what this can do, what kind of CPU voltage it can take, what that means in terms of temperatures. And you got to remember, this is under some kind of a load. It's not going to be your kind of AVX load that you'd have within Windows and things like that, but it's going to be something. Obviously, anyone who's tested Ryzen before will know kind of what safe voltages are. And at the moment, we're at 1.25 volts. So we are getting to the kind of mid to higher end side of things. You know, you can easily put through kind of 1.35 volts on Ryzen, no problem at all. If you've got the right kind of cooling, 1.4 volts is where really you want to be sort of looking at and going, maybe that's not the right way to go. So I'm guessing it's not really going to go above 1.25 looking at it. We're currently sitting CPU temperature at 85 degrees. The fan I can hear has kind of gone up a little bit. But it's got us from our default frequency of 3.4 gigahertz up to 4.6. Obviously, you've got to remember the default frequency of 3.4 is just our base clock. It's not any kind of boost. So all we're doing is just basically setting it to 4.6 gigahertz, kind of a standard really. And then click apply, and then it's done. So we haven't gone into Windows. We haven't kind of, you know, had any issues there. This is all before we've even got to that point, which I think is a really, really nice thing, especially if you've never overclocked or done anything like that before. So there's that. If we go into the main part of the BIOS, you can see that we are now at 4.6 gigahertz, and we have lots of things in here. So we have all of our manual overclocking settings. We have LN2 mode. We have B-clock overclocking for anyone who really wants to kind of get that last couple of, you know, megahertz out of here. We have all of our memory voltages and things like that as well. Speaking of memory, we do have stuff over here so we can set our XMP profile. So it sets it at 3600 megahertz, puts all the timings and everything in there as well, tells us what our default timings were, what they are, third timing configurations. There's actually probably more overclocking settings on memory on this board than there is most boards when it comes to just general overclocking. We also have extras. Now this is the thing that I wanted to talk about. So obviously we had OC Robot, which kind of did all this and, you know, got us up to 4.6 gigahertz. But once we're there, we can then run stress test. So what it's doing now is taking that 4.6 gigahertz overclock and it's actually stress testing it. So it's keeping the frequency. It's not sort of, you know, increasing that anymore. It's just checking to see if that is stable. It's also keeping the voltage at 1.253, so with V-droop, that's probably 1.25, but it just has a little bit of a fluctuation. You can see it moving now. And then our CPU temperature of 82 degrees. But it's basically running a stress test for us, which is typically what we do as overclockers. We would go into Windows, we'd open up OCCT, we'd open Prime 95, Cinebench, if you wanted to put different workloads for it, like AVX and things like that, you'd run a different version of Cinebench. We're doing all of that without even getting into Windows. So we're not having to deal with blue screens of death. We're not having to deal with, all that kind of stuff in Windows. We're taking that whole variable out of the equation and just running it all in the BIOS. And so far, we're just coming up to a minute now. Obviously, when it comes to overclocking stress testing, I'd always say do it for about 15 minutes when you're really trying to, get the last bit out of it. But we're here for a minute. You'd like to think if it was going to fall over, it would be because of the temperatures, which are currently at 85 degrees. If it's going to fall over, it would have done so by now. And then we have it. This is what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you that EVGA have made an AMD board, and they've made probably one of the handiest features within the BIOS that I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like this from the big boys. ASUS, Gigabyte, MSI. Never seen this. EVGA have come along. And I don't know, for me, if I was looking at getting into overclocking for the first time, this would be a real game changer. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Other than that, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know exactly what to do, and we will have a full written review on this very, very soon over on eTeknix.com. Until then, see you later, guys. Bye-bye.